Hello, everyone. Welcome to YP4's Instagram Live. Thank y'all for joining us. My name is Andrea Sosa. I am the co-executive director of Young People 4. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm super excited to kick off this conversation with y'all. For those of you that don't know, YP4 is a social justice incubator. We provide lifelong social justice leadership training to unlock the potential of young folks who have been historically left out of opportunity. We are a national network of that centers Black, Brown, Indigenous, disabled, LGBTQ+ young folks that are leading in education, media, politics, business, government, and everywhere. And we are so excited to have this conversation with y'all. We are going to be having an amazing guest speaker today to chat about, what is your role in social justice? We are going to have Ky'Eisha Penn from the class of 2012 join us. And let's go ahead and let Ky'Eisha call. We're going to be chatting about what your role is in social justice. There's so much happening in the world right now. We just went through an election, and we're so happy to have you here, Ky'Eisha, to have this conversation.
Hey.
How are you doing?
So happy to be here. Let me adjust my visuals here so you can see my whole face.
Looking good.
How are you? It's so good to see you.
So good to see your face. Thank you for joining. So can you introduce yourself? Let folks know who you are, what you do, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. My name is Ky'Eisha Penn, as Andrea said. I am a YP4 alum from the class of 2012. Whoop, whoop, shout out to my class. I'm excited to be joining you all today. Since my time at YP4, I have been in a lot of different roles, but currently I'm a staff attorney at Advancement Project, national office, as a civil rights attorney. Very excited to be there and doing the work that we do, the good Lord's work, as I like to say. I am a staff attorney working with our Opportunity to Learn project, which is essentially our education side. And most of my work is geared towards dismantling school to prison pipeline with our working with our partners on the ground, and ending the overcriminalization of youth in schools. And with that comes with pushing for the ending of policing and not just the ending of police itself. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that further into this live.
Yes, let's give Ky'Eisha some love in the comments. You are doing amazing work, and we're so lucky to have you as part of our YP4 fam. And so, we want to have this conversation with you because a lot of folks are kind of feeling this moment of limbo. There's so much happening in the world. We just, had a massive election, except for Georgia, still happening, side note. And, there's folks that are in the streets protesting that are, doing amazing work. And we, want to know, where do we go from here? We know that there are so many approaches to social change and to social justice that can help us keep this momentum going. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those approaches are, and specifically also tell us a little bit about the approach that you use in your own work?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm not sure how many people know about the work that YP4 does and the approaches that they have. So I do want to just go ahead and mention those and talk about how I use one in particular with the work that I do. So YP4 has what's that? 5 different approaches: advocacy, idea creation, governance, direct service, community organizing. As just different approaches of how you can create change in your community and contribute to social justice. And some of those I went and made sure that I wrote notes so I can actually give a snippet on what those are. So with advocacy, which is one of the tools and one of the approaches that I use in my work, the way that we have it is basically representing constituencies who may not currently have a seat at the table, or who are trying to have a seat at the table. Then we have idea creation, those people who are, really creating knowledge or like creating those ideas. And they're at the very front of our planning process of what we want to create and the change we want to see. We have governance, where we're working with elected officials or appointed officials, and really pushing for the changes that we want, but in a different way, in which we're pushing for other people to act to create, the changes that we want to see. We have direct services where you're working with direct communities or people in those communities. And then we have community organizing where you're mobilizing people and building power, and, I guess helping communities acknowledge the power that they do have, to create certain changes. And at any point, if I misspeak or say anything wrong, definitely correct me, Andrea, because you are also super well versed in this. And I think I use a combination of approaches, but one of the approaches that I trained on at our national summit, YP4, was advocacy. And that's our approach where it's geared towards representing constituencies, right? That may not currently have a seat at the table, but may want to have a seat at the table, or are trying to invoke some type of influence or influence others that have that seat. And right now in my work, we work directly with grassroots organizations who are on the ground doing the work. So these are people who are really well versed in community organizing. They're organizers. They're mobilizing people in their communities. They see a change. Well, they see an issue and they want to create change in their communities. And we center them in all of our work that we do. And we call that movement lawyering. So the movement is always at the center of our work. We don't go into communities and say, hey, we see that, there's a lot of police in your community. Let's do this about it. It's the communities that actually live there who are directly impacted, letting us know how we can be useful in supporting their work on the ground. And with that, I think that that's a combination of community organizing, but also that the advocacy piece where we may have a seat at the table in certain rooms, and we're bringing these community organizers in so that they can use their voices to advocate on behalf of the things that they want to see changed in their communities or in their states, or in their regions. And there's some really great examples of what that looks like. From the movement that's currently, still in place. People are still on the grounds. People are still protesting. It's not just Black Lives Matter. It's not just the election, but these people see and acknowledge things that they want to change in their communities, and they have a better idea, or we've been reimagining for so long. Now they're just like, let's put this into action. We're gonna, go out to the streets and try to make something shake. So we're seeing that day to day. And I think that these approaches are perfect examples of how people use that to actually mobilize and move and act.
Yeah, and you made a great point of, putting together these approaches to social justice, because that is exactly what we need. We need folks that are doing work at every single level and in every single approach. We need
Absolutely
organizers. We need folks in governance. We need folks that are doing the advocacy work that you're doing, and all of those working together is, how we move our movement forward. And I want to talk a little bit about how folks can kind of identify what their approach to social justice is. There are folks that, might be leading organizations, or that might be, out protesting on the streets. And can you tell us a little bit about why it's important to kind of name these roles and how folks can come to identify with one of those approaches?
Right. I think that we all have a role to play in creating the society that we want to see. I think there was a quote that I heard, and I may butcher it, but I think it went something like, every generation has a responsibility to leave, I guess, the world in a better place than they were, something like that, leave the world in a better place than they found it. We have a responsibility to contribute to what we want to see, that change that we want to see. And I think that sometimes when we name these, we've given specific names to these approaches, so that may sound a little intimidating, but I think that everybody actually can fit into one of these categories. And maybe we're not naming, people aren't labeling it as such, but we have some people who really enjoy calling people out on, their inconsistencies, and they want to hold people accountable for what they said that they're, going to do. And those may be people who fit more in the governance, approach, like people who acknowledge that you have power. You said that you were going to do this, and now you need to do this. And I think a perfect example of that was this video that was going around on social media, where there was a young lady that went up to one of the committee meetings, and she spoke at the podium, and she just read everybody, because it was a matter of, this is the change that we want to see. And this is the position that you're in, the power that you have. And you said that you're going to do this, but you haven't done it. And she may not say, I identify with the governance approach, but, you know, I would kind of place her there. And we have some people who are really great at creating ideas, may not be that great with following through. That's fine. We need the people that, you know, have the creativity to kind of envision what it is that we're actually, you know, what we want to actually see. And we need those people to start off at the forefront. And then we have some other people that's going to execute that plan. And I think it's really important to identify what your strengths are, because I think a lot of the times we try to figure out how to plug into a particular role, not acknowledging that we already have skills that will be beneficial in creating change, or, you know, in movement work, that you haven't just put a label on, if that makes sense.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes a lot of folks are organizing without even realizing that it's actually organizing. If you're calling your folks to talk about things or bringing them to a meeting, you're organizing. And it's important to name that, so that you know that you are part of this movement and that you are playing a role, and that there are other folks that are doing that are leading with other approaches, and we're all, you know, going towards the same North Star. And it's important to know that we're all a part of that. And you talked about accountability. And I want to go to this point because we, you know, just had an election earlier this year, and a lot of folks were talking about, you know, let's get out the vote. Let's you know, we need to make sure that our communities vote and are represented. And we did, and we showed up, and we voted, and we made sure that our communities voted. And, you know, now that's when the real work starts. That's when the real organizing starts. That's when we have to actually push for the change that we want. And that's when we actually have to hold elected officials accountable. And you talked a little bit about that through governance. What does accountability look like through different approaches?
Absolutely. So you said that perfectly. You know, now that the election is over and we have a president-elect that will hopefully actually, you know, be installed in January, you know, people, they started the work, they did it on election day, and then people are saying, but what now?
Mm-hmm.
And as you stated, this is when the real work starts. So it's not enough to just vote. It's not enough to just get your friends to vote. But now we need people to implement policies that actually represent what it is that we say that we want in our communities, what it is that we need in our communities, what it is that people on the ground are fighting for. And we can do that in a couple different ways, right? So community organizing. We can continue to mobilize people on the ground. We can continue to build power, which is such a beautiful thing. I think that everyone should have a political home. Everyone should be plugged in some way in their communities, where not only their voice is being heard, but they're making way for that, to make sure that other people have the opportunity to have their voices and their concerns heard. And then we take it up from there. There are people who currently are friends with people who are elected officials, or, you know, are appointed in places of power. And we have to really play on those relationships. Relationship building is going to be extremely important, because those are going to be those individuals where we're going to go and we're going to schedule meetings with, you know, legislators. And we call that lobbying, but sometimes that's just scheduling coffee. And maybe I need to talk to you about what's going on in Liberty City. That's where I'm from. So maybe I need to talk to you about, you know, the issues that, you know, my community is facing there in Miami. Or maybe it's going to be some demand letters. You know, accountability sometimes looks like using your resources to request FOIAs. So everyone has an opportunity. In each state, they have a different law where you can request information that is public record. So from government records to agencies in the state, maybe it's requesting those documents and saying, hey, I see that you're spending a lot of money, you know, in this department, but you're underfunding schools. And I want to make sure that this is funded, or I want to know why this money is going this place. And you send a demand letter. If the demand letter isn't enough, you make that meeting. If the meeting isn't enough, then maybe you'll have to put someone on blast in a public meeting where you have the opportunity to speak and be heard. So accountability can look a lot of different ways. And I think it's really important that we don't only just elect these people, but we actually hold them accountable for all the promises that they made you to get your vote. You know, we hold them accountable for all the things that they said that they were going to do, or they were going to look into, or the task force that they were going to create. Like, we have to hold them to that word, because once they get there, if we don't hold them accountable, then they're going to think that they can always expect our vote and that they're always going to be able to sit in that particular seat and have that power and do nothing for the community. I may have gone on a tangent, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we can hold our elected officials and just individuals that have power, whether or not you voted for them or not. They could have been appointed by your governor. Just a plug from the work that I was doing at the ACLU of New Jersey. It was there that I found out that not all state prosecutors are elected. You know, we have 3 states where they're appointed by the governor, and that takes away that power from people on the ground to be able to pick that person. And now you have to be mindful of all of the power that these elected officials have to not only implement policies, but appoint people that can also impact you. And I learned that from YP4. So yeah, so we did a know your public official training and what the power of the seat was. And that was a model that I took from YP4 and did that in New Jersey. And a lot of people don't know that information. So there's a lot of different ways that we can hold our elected officials accountable, but continue to do the public and political education that's needed to bring people into the work.
Yes, yes. And you said that, beautifully. There's so many steps that we can take and that we can do in our communities. And number one is, understanding what those positions are that we just elected and what they do. And once we do that, we can hold them accountable. If it's through idea creation, it's through, how can we incorporate art in that accountability?
Yeah.
How can we incorporate community organizing and bring our communities to protest in front of a city hall? And so it's using all of those at our disposal. And you mentioned at the end, bringing folks in. And I know that there may be folks watching that may not necessarily either identify with a specific approach to social justice, or not say, oh, I don't identify as a community organizer, or even just an agent of social justice. But everybody has a role to play. And no matter what you're doing in your community, you have a role to contribute. What would you say to folks that don't necessarily identify as an organizer or as an idea creator? How can we bring our community in and bring those folks in to our movement as well, so that we can all work collectively towards that North Star?
Absolutely. I think that sometimes we have an issue with labeling things because we feel like we have to live up to whatever that title is. And I suffer from the same thing sometimes too, because I'm just like, oh, I'm a baby lawyer. And then I have people saying, no, you're a lawyer. Like, you took the bar, you're a lawyer. So I understand that. Like, I totally get it. But I think that we all have talents, right? And you may not need to label them. Some people love to network on social media, and they have a large following, so they have some type of influence. And I think over the course of this entire pandemic so far, there has been a lot of use of social media as a public education tool and as a means to influence people and to do research and whatnot. So like, you may not realize that some of that may be idea creation, some of that is advocacy work. I remember that there was I forget what exactly was happening, but people used Twitter as a form of advocacy when they were tweeting elected officials. So there's so many different ways that you can take the things that you're already good at and things that you're already spending your time on and doing now, to really tap into the movement work. I know that there is some backlash, I guess, from people who are saying Twitter activists, but there's actually a lot of power in using social media, as we've seen, over the course of this pandemic, as a tool for social justice. Outside of that, we have people who are just really great with the idea creation, and that is the name of the approach, but like just creating ideas and very creative in terms of implementing, I guess, people who are good with event planning, or people who are great with just creating some type of way to mobilize or gather folks. Like, they may not know that they can be useful in a particular approach in some way in the movement. As you stated before, there's a lot of different roles to be played, and you may not want to be on the front line, but you can really make some nice posters that we need, to get our messages across. So there's tons of ways for people to be used. I like to be out there with the people, I'm not really great with, creating the idea, but I can follow through if you give me instruction. So I just want people who may think that, they don't have a place in, the movement to know that everything that we do is political. The way that our lives are governed, the policies that are in place, all of that is political. So I don't think that it's enough to say that you're not a political person, you're not into politics, because that governs the way that we live. And if you want to have some type of control over, what your life looks like, and how you get to live your life, then you have to plug in some type of way, from making the posters for the protests, to being on the front lines, to making the phone calls, to going into speaking to elected officials. And even now in my work, I do have to say that I'm not representing Advancement Project in this capacity. I'm representing myself, who happen to work at Advancement Project. But even in our work, now after the election, we have to see, now what does our work look like now? And maybe that's sitting on more phone calls with people who are connected to elected officials. Maybe that's building coalitions so that we can kind of figure out, what do we want from this new administration, for the communities that we represent and the organizations that we support on the ground. So
yeah,
I don't really think that we have a choice as to whether or not, we plug in. I think that it's a matter of what way we're going to plug in and create the change that we want to see.
right. That's so real. And no matter, we're all affected by the decisions that are made for us, and whether we're not at the table, it's still going to happen. And
Right.
you said that so well. And we're in a moment where we have been, resisting for many years, and have been fighting for our communities for many years. And we've been trying to build amidst all of this. What does building power for the long term look like? We know that we just, mobilized, and we were out there in this election, and we showed up. And we know that we're going to hold our elected officials accountable to do what we need to do. How do we keep that momentum going? But more importantly, how do we build for the long term to make sure that our communities are engaged, and that we're building towards that vision of, collective liberation for all of our communities? What does that long term look like?
That's a good question. I think that we have to celebrate all the victories that we have along the way to getting completely free, right? So I can give an example of, sorry, I had something pop up, but I can give an example of this. We've been hearing the term abolition. Not only this year, we've heard it before, but we've really been hearing it, as of late. And we know that abolition isn't necessarily going to happen in the year 2020 or in the year 2021, but the steps that we make to get to that place, whenever that will happen, we celebrate those victories, knowing that there's still work to be done. So when there was, the defunding of, certain police departments in different states or different cities throughout the nation, we celebrated that. And we're just like, okay, now that you committed to that, now we have to make sure that there's some follow through. We have to make sure that that's implemented. And we have to make sure that the funds that are being taken away from those, police departments are now reinvested into communities. And now that you said that you're going to reinvest it, our next step is, where do we reinvest those? So I think a part of it is knowing that we have a very big, broad goal of what we think liberation looks like and the different steps to getting there. And we have to celebrate every accomplishment we get along the way, and continue to educate, continue to do the public and political education to bring more folks into the work. Going on a tangent, kind of forgot the other part of your question.
How do we make sure we're building for the long term? How do we make sure that this momentum doesn't end just now?
Yeah, I think I kind of said it a little bit, and it's just continuing to build that power on the ground and bringing folks into the work. I think that it's going to be constant, like, accountability and, check-ins for ourselves to make sure that we're not, complacent with where we are in the journey to getting complete liberation. You have to have folks who are totally committed to getting free. I think that when you have people who know that the work has to be done in order for them to be totally free, they're going to hold you accountable to hold up your end of the bargain, because your liberation is tied to mine. And I think once we understand that, then, there's no way that we can lose.
Yeah, no, that's, incredible. And, a lot of folks right now are trying to figure out where they fit, where their role is in all of this work. And we just had, national uprisings and mobilizations happen all over the country. And we're trying to make sure that all of that continues and that we don't, like you said, become complacent and bring our communities along. So for the folks that are watching, what would you say to them about, their role for social justice? How can we play into our strengths? We know that not everybody has the same skills and the same set of strengths, and there are folks that are super well versed in holding elected officials accountable, some folks that are amazing artists. How can we lean into the strengths that we have, not just as individuals but as a community? Some communities have more privilege than others. How can we
Mhm.
leverage that privilege? How can we leverage those strengths to identify what the role of our communities, of us as individuals, should be in social justice and pushing this movement forward in accountability, but also in building?
Absolutely. I think that outside of bringing people in and building power, I stated prior that I think that we all have to be connected to some type of political home,
Mm,
some type of organization or group of people who are doing this work on the ground. Um, Essentially, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel because there are people all over the United States, all over the world, who are currently organizing in some capacity. And there's tons of work to be done and tons of needs. So you plug in and you see what's needed from that group and whether or not you can offer, or you have a skill or a talent that you can offer to that group. And in the meantime, if you don't have a particular skill, then you can spend that time just getting educated, reading. Like I'm tell people all the time, I'm forever learning. So maybe my role in that, in that capacity, if I don't have anything to offer at that moment outside of my presence and support, maybe I need to be well read. Maybe I need to read up on the foundations of organizing and how we get free, and read some of the scholarly work that's coming out now, that's continuing to be published, about the movement work that we're currently doing on the ground. So part of it is self-education. There's tons of resources online for people to plug into and get educated, and a lot of different organizations that's doing the work where they are welcoming people in. So here in Washington D.C., we have YP100, we have Black Swan Academy, we have so many organizations just in D.C. that's doing this incredible work, that they're welcoming people in, into that space to continue to build, because, there's power in numbers. And we've seen that in the streets, especially, that there's power in numbers, and even in the election.
yeah, exactly. And I think that it's really important to kind of make that assessment of where can I grow and where are my strengths, but where can I also be, if I don't really know how the positions of, how local government functions, where can I seek out that information? What books should I be reading? And it takes a lot to really do that self-analysis to say,
Yeah.
these in my own knowledge or in my own abilities or in my own strength.
Yeah.
And for folks that do want to learn a little bit more about the positions of government and how government works at every level, you can go to YP4's YouTube, and we did a civic engagement training series this summer, where we broke down how each level of government functions and what they do and how they affect your life. So as we're thinking about accountability and moving forward on our quest for collective liberation, it's important to know what these folks do. So it's a free resource, and folks can check it out on our YouTube. There's a link in our bio. And Ky'Eisha, what's your last charge, your final words for the folks that are watching?
I did have this thought come to my mind. So I had no idea that I was interested in community organizing until someone invited me to a meeting, for Dream Defenders when I was living in Tallahassee. And if I had never been invited to that meeting, I would have never known what community organizing was. I would have never been as involved as I was with Dream Defenders when I was in Tallahassee. And it wasn't until then that I realized what type of attorney that I wanted to become. So I would have never fulfilled my purpose if it wasn't for someone inviting me out to come learn about the work that they were doing and why it was important. So I think even for the folks who are currently doing the work, never stop inviting those people in, because people are curious. We are curious about, the things that we don't know, and it may be something that's going to totally change their life, and they may change the world one day. So continue to invite people in. If you're not getting invited in, seek the information that you desire to learn about. Self-education is going to be criminal right now. Like, it's going to be very important, especially during the pandemic when we're home. Hopefully, if you have a little time, you can, read up more. There's tons of scholars out there talking about this work, and are inviting people in to have the conversation. So thank you so much, Andrea, for having me. If people have questions or want to be plugged into people that I know doing this work, like, by all means, I refer people to amazing people that I know that are doing this work all the time. And YP4 is an amazing resource that really got me started as well.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ky'Eisha, for sharing your brilliance with us. And I know that your information was so insightful, especially for the folks that are watching, that are trying to figure out what their role is right now in this moment, and how to continue moving our movement forward. And you've been so insightful, and always really grateful to be in community with you, even if it is virtually.
Right.
And thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yay. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye, everyone.